Welcome back. Results of the much anticipated bank stress tests are now in, and they found that 9 of the 19 banks have enough capital to withstand even a deeper recession.
10 other banks must raise a total of $75 billion in new capital, preferably in the private sector, according to the government, to withstand possible future losses. Joining us now with more on what these test results really mean is Kartik Raman, Associate Professor of Finance at Bentley University in Massachusetts. Kartik, good to have you here. Thanks.
Thank
Kartik,
you for having me.
Welcome. And at the macro level, the whole concept of a stress test, as an individual, am I in good health? For the banking system, are the largest banks in the country in good health or bad health, or does it depend?
I think they're largely in good health. My view is that the stress tests, just like you recognize the importance of the stress test for any entity, I feel that the larger purpose of these stress tests was really to change the behavior of banks going forward with respect to their risk-taking incentives and lending practices and so on.
Do you think it is going to make a difference? Will they change their behaviors?
I think it will, because if you notice, from the results of the stress test, what the government has really done is they've forced some of these banks to raise new capital, which basically dilutes existing shareholders' equity, and they're forcing the managers to, say, in Bank of America, to sell off some assets, diluting shareholders' capital. And what this does is it really forces, it makes managers very uncomfortable to begin with, and makes them think about, whether they really want to take decisions in the future that would, again, necessitate government intervention.
It's interesting. Paul Krugman, Nobel winner in economics, writer for the New York Times, had an interesting recent column and said, perhaps what is going to happen is banking is going to go back to becoming boring banking. In other words, there will not be the kind of risk-taking that has been in the past. Would you agree with that?
I think it's going in that direction. I'm not sure if it's going to entirely go towards that direction, particularly because banks, many of the large banks especially these days are quite well diversified. They're not just doing commercial banking. They have investment banks. They have other various divisions. So, if you take a large bank like Bank of America, there will be some risk taking, and they should be taking on some level of risk, to benefit the shareholders. At the same time, I think it's not going to go to an extreme. I think that's the real benefit I see from these stress tests, is that the message that it sends to the bank executives.
What kind of a message is received by those at the banks, such as State Street in Boston, who passed the stress test? They're doing okay according to this government litmus test. What does it mean for them, and what does it mean for customers and business in New England and Boston, if anything?
I think that's a good question. I think there are very important implications for all banks, because I feel that the stress test really sets an example. Even banks that are not required to raise new capital, are basically put on alert that if this happens to them in the future, there's a possibility that there will be some government intervention, and they may have to do things that they would otherwise be uncomfortable doing. So in that sense, it's a positive, and it has good implications for the overall economy, for businesses in general, because at the end of the day, what got us here was creditors became it became a very unfriendly environment for creditors to make funds available. And what I think these stress tests and the government actions are really accomplishing is they're conveying to creditors that or suppliers of funds that we're going to take actions that make managers and risk-loving equity holders more cognizant of the level of risk that they're exposing the firm to.
One of the things that was stated in the stress test, as far as the purpose goes, is to test these banks to see if they could withstand a greater deterioration in the economy. Correct. It looks like the economy may not be deteriorating any further, and we may have hit bottom. So maybe it is that these banks don't really have to worry about any of this. So what's your take on where the economy is going? Are these stress tests, in a way, a moot question at this point?
Is the stress test a moot point?
Yeah, because the economy is getting better, and it may not be that these banks will even have to withstand the kind of deterioration that they're being tested for.
No, I think that's a good point. It could be viewed as a moot point, which is why I think the larger purpose of these stress tests was to really instill confidence in the creditors by trying to change the behavior of managers and executives. I think the economy, the signs are, the indicators are suggesting that the economy is turning around. If you look at the...
At least it's not falling at the same rate it was, and perhaps is at whatever this infamous bottom is.
Correct. If you look at the money supply growth, and if you look at the stock market and view that as leading indicators, it is suggesting that the economy is turning around. The yield curves are steepening, which is good for the banks. It gives them greater incentives to make money available and lend.
It seems to me, in part, what we've seen is the critically important role that banks play in our economy. But the other question I have is, from an industry point of view, is this the beginning, perhaps, of further consolidation of the banks in this country?
It could be, depending on, that's one concern I have about the stress test is, did the stress tests leave out many of the smaller banks that really need the stress tests? These are large, very large banks that they conducted the stress tests on, and understandably so. But I think there are many more smaller banks, community banks, that are not as well diversified as these very large ones, and I'm not sure they have the capacity to withstand. And that's where I think the questions really might emerge about how healthy they are. And it could possibly lead to consolidation in the industry.
Interesting. We had on as a guest Rich Holbrook, the CEO of Eastern Bank. And he said, what's the big deal? We go through and we put our own stress test on ourselves all of the time. And so his view was, well-run banks, and maybe that's the key, do this on a routine basis.
Absolutely, which is very consistent with the larger purpose of these stress tests. It's not that these banks don't do these stress tests themselves. They're very cognizant of their health and so on.
Well, I feel less stressed now and calmer, so it's great to have you here. Kartik Raman, Associate Professor of Finance at Bentley University. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kartik.
Thank you for having me.